So I should tell you how this presentation came to be created. You don't often go to two meetings back to back in the same city, but that's what I did. So there was a regenerative medicine meeting in San Francisco in May. There were no transplant physicians there were no nephrologists there. There was nobody like you at that meeting, believe me. And then I went to San Francisco again for the World Transplant Congress. And in each session, I was particularly interested in stem cell generation of organs as a competing technology to what you guys know well of the way that we do transplantation now. Not only interested in the science, but the medical politics. Many of you may not respect medical politics, but a lot of things would never happen without medical politics. And it occurred to me that things are falling between the cracks. And I'm going to try to convince you today that you've probably excluded from your thinking entirely an area in which you should be mentally and spiritually and every other way very, very active. That you're sort of pushing it to the back of your brain and it should be at the forefront. And I will tell you why I think that later on. And I'll also tell you why your natural tendencies, your behavioral tendencies that are normal, those tendencies being to reject new things that you're not familiar with, to resist change, and to have a kind of nostalgia for the way things were before, those both are behaviors that are very much needed in this area. So if you find those, emotions occurring within you, that's exactly what the field needs at the moment. Okay, so so who am I? I'm Kim Solez, and 23 years ago, I developed BAMF classification in this little building. It was a meeting of 21 people. That's the Trans-Canada Pipeline Pavilion building of the BAMF Center. And we rapidly became much larger and outgrew that building, but that's where we started. And so Lorraine Rackison and I presided over that first meeting. And then for the next 22 years, there was no structure. This grew and grew and grew, and everybody became familiar with the name BAMF. But there was no structure. There was no company. There was no organization. We just had the benign guiding hand of Drs. Solez and Rackison running this. And then in the long run, we figured that that wouldn't work. And so more recently, we've created the BAMF Foundation for Allograft Pathology, which is a non-profit Swiss foundation. The classification, as you probably know, has histologic grading as a component, and many of the lesions shown here are the key lesions of the diagnosis of cell-mediated or antibody-mediated rejection. It also deals with all other entities that you can find. So it's not just a rejection classification, it's a classification of all pathologic conditions you may encounter in the transplanted kidney. It began with the kidney, but ultimately the meetings that I run embrace all solid organs: heart, lung, liver, pancreas, small bowel, composite tissue graft, the whole ball of wax. This is the history of those meetings beginning in '91 with the first conference. We've tried to be inclusive, tried to make all the stakeholders be a part of this process. Originally, we thought since this is called the Banff classification, the meetings have to be in Banff, but then we discovered that people don't know that Banff is a town. People have increasingly thought that Banff is a medical acronym, therefore you should spell it in all caps. And it must be that every letter means something, but they don't know what. And so, yeah, so we discovered we could have it wherever the heck we want. And the first meeting held far from any town called Banff was in La Coruña, Spain in 2007. Our 2011 meeting was in Paris. 2013 was in Brazil, so we're no longer bound to have the meetings in some place called Banff. In 2013, we established the Banff Foundation for Allograft Pathology. The significance of the Banff papers, there are 4,244 citations to the 9 Banff meeting reports, 790 Banff or Transplantation papers in PubMed, and the Banff 2003 meeting report is the most cited HAT paper. And 3 of the Banff meeting reports are amongst the top 4 cited HAT articles. These red dots show the areas of greatest publication activity, and this graph shows the number of Banff articles per year. There were some before '91 because there are some medical questions about like the Banff Park and everything, but there are very few Banff articles before the Banff classification began. This is the structure of the Banff Foundation. And I won't go through it all, you may not know many of these names, but it includes an organ steering committee that represents all organs, working groups to deal with the particularly hot issues in the field, and the scientific program committee that helps to organize the program for the Banff meeting, which is held every 2 years. So I chair the board of trustees, but a lot of things are transparent and obvious now, like the fact that the chair of the board can only serve for 2 3-year terms. I've already served for a year. So one thing you know for certain is that I'll be gone within 5 years. I can't be the chair beyond this point. 5 years from now. These are some pictures from the Banff meetings. And the next Banff meeting will be in Vancouver. It's the Sheraton Wall Center, October 5th to the 10th, 2015. And it will be joint between the Canadian Society of Transplantation and the Banff Foundation. So it's a joint project between those two. That meeting is expected to have about 600 delegates. Once again, we believe that all the stakeholders will be represented in this meeting. And it may seem to you like it's desirable for the meeting to get as big as it can possibly get. But there's something peculiar about this meeting, very, very peculiar. And that is that people say it's the best transplant meeting, and that obviously can't be true. But why do they say that? So the way that it works, a lot of the meeting is a consensus generation, and it's physician-run consensus generation. You know, if within this institution or any other previous institution that you've worked in, if you wanted to generate consensus, the way you did it was people said, well, you have to hire a professional facilitator who knows nothing about the subject you're generating consensus about, but everything about teaching people how to think in a new way and generating consensus. So you get this person who is trained in generating consensus to come in and you put sticky notes on the board and all sorts of things like that. And every single one of you has been a part of many sessions like that. But you never had anybody running it who actually knew about the subject. And so we've done this in a kind of illegal way where we've always generated consensus with somebody who actually knew what they were talking about running the meeting. But that means you have to be flexible. You cannot come into the room with a sort of macho feeling that, you know, you got the best ideas and you're unwilling to change your ideas, because then you'll wreck the whole consensus generation. So I have from the beginning been willing to change my mind, and that occurred at the very first meeting where that sheet of paper that I brought to the meeting that I thought was going to be the BAMF classification, what we ended up with bore no resemblance to that, but what was very successful. The first night, everybody thought that the meeting was a failure, and they said, oh, you know, it's such a shame, Kim, you put all this time into this meeting and it's obviously a complete bloody failure. Anyway, there was an opera and a bunch of other exciting things to go to that night, and the next morning I got up early and put kind of a consensus, what I saw as the different points of view sort of in one cohesive whole on the board, and people came into the room and wow, and so that was really what happened. It was only on day 2 that it was clear that there would be a BAMF classification, or that the meeting was even worth attending. So this gives you some idea of the process. Most of you are probably not used to going to meetings that are quite as fluid as this. It's fluid in another way too, in that we try to organize recreation, and often people refuse to go to the recreation part because they want to stay and take part in the science part. So it's really exciting, the fact we don't lose people. So sometimes these meetings are said to be the best meetings in transplantation. It's obviously false. We don't have the resources to. So why do people say that? It's an interesting question. I think people mean is they like the size, the atmosphere, the spirit, the productivity of the meetings. These attributes must be maintained. But how does spirit work? Do you think there's any science behind spirit, or is spirit one of these nebulous things that cannot be defined? Well, do you all know about Dunbar's number? This is a very variable thing. I speak to a lot of different groups. Some groups, everybody knows about Dunbar's number, and some groups, almost nobody. And I think a lot of you are looking puzzled, so you don't know about Dunbar's number. Dunbar's number relates the size of your neocortex, the newest part of the brain, to the size of your social group, the number of people that you can have an empathetic, or truly empathetic friendship where you really care what's going on with them. You know, at a large meeting, you meet a lot of people in the hallway that you recognize but actually do not wish to talk to. You don't want to hear any stories from them. You don't want to hear anything new in that person's life. You're hoping they'll just keep on walking, you know. And actually, the number of people you'd like to talk to at a meeting is about between 100 and 200. The average is 150, because that's the number of people you can really care about. And if you look at primates with smaller neocortexes, their social groups are, it's a very linear relationship in the size of your neocortex. You imagine with brain augmentation in the future, one of the things we could do is have more empathetic friends. I don't know that that is going to be the focus, but it could be a focus. So I think the reason that the BAMF meetings have been so successful is most of the active working parts of them have been within this Dunbar's number area, where people were working in groups of 100 to 200 and felt really comfortable about that. Now, as many of you know, I teach a course on technology and the future of medicine, and we talk about a lot of different trends and exponential increase in price performance of computing and the way that that relates to everything else, to Moore's law, and then there's Eron's law, which you probably know about also. There's something going down, and what's going down is the number of new drugs coming to the market per R&D productivity billion-dollar expenditure. It's becoming more and more costly to bring a new drug to the market. So on the one hand, you have this price performance of computing thing, which suggests that in about the year 2045, which is only 31 years from now, and most of you will be alive and active. You may not think so, but you don't understand longevity, then you'll be there. And so this point at which machines are smarter, not just than individual humans, but in the entire aggregate intelligence of the whole human race, you'll be alive when that happens. It's something highly significant called the technological singularity. But you're in transplantation, and so there's something for you that's sort of more tangible, and that's what effect the stem cell is going to have on your field. You see those three hearts there at the bottom? So first it is a normal heart, right? And then the one in the middle is a ghost heart. It's a decellularized heart. We've squirted detergent in and all those cells are gone. And then that cute little mildly pink one at the far right is a recellularized heart where you've squirted in stem cells and they've gone to all the right places. And so the heart is coming back to life, but it is going to be absolutely genetically identical to the person you're putting it into because it's their stem cells that you used, and it's kind of a perfect solution. And the idea that this is a perfect solution has convinced a lot of people in transplantation that this is big trouble, but that all they can do is just put their head in the sand and not try to do anything practical about it, because this is going to make everything you've ever learned about transplantation irrelevant, and your job irrelevant, and you irrelevant, right? I'm here to tell you that's exactly wrong. That this is something that's not something outside of your field. This is within your field. This is something you should be learning about. This is something that every transplant physician should be active in. So the BAMF Foundation, which I run, must remain youthful and relevant for the future. So it must adapt, plan for changes, and one of the changes is this idea of the stem cell-grown organ. You know, there are many theories about the future of transplantation. You'd be familiar with the losing its luster, that you can show in many ways that it's just not quite as exciting and high profile to be in this field as it once was. And there are many other things that you can think of as a possible guiding force that would determine what the future is. But at some point, one encounters a lot of resistance to thinking about this. So I've been trying to figure out a way to get over that resistance, so people don't just sit there and say, Dr. Solez, talk to me about something, and I was so resistant that I didn't really even listen after a while, and then he went away and I felt much more comfortable. That's not what we're looking to do here. So one of the things that intrigued me some time ago, it's an accidental fact of my life, that in '94, I developed the first email discussion groups and sort of forums, online forums and websites in renal medicine, transplant medicine, renal pathology. David Crippen was doing the same thing in critical care medicine. He's about as different from me as anybody could possibly be, in ways that I'll describe later in the lecture, because otherwise you might. Anyway, I'll leave a little, just think of somebody who's remarkably different from me and what that person would be like. And so that's how different the future of transplantation you've always assumed is from the real future that you will actually encounter. And this is not beyond your lifetime. This is within your working life. This is something practical for you. This is something that is real for you. So, this is not a sort of easy, simple thing. One thing is that you might say from the Erome's Law thing that, well, the FDA should lighten up. They just are, way too into making rules and stuff, and they should lighten up. They should make it easier to bring drugs to the market, make it easier to bring stem cell therapies to the market. That's very unlikely to happen because the biggest problem they have right now, all of you, even though you're normal people leading normal lives, you'd have like a favorite celebrity or sports star. What that person does is really important to you, and it influences you a lot. And if that person goes to Mexico or China to get some stem cell therapy and they come back claiming that their lives have been changed by this, and suddenly their knee or their hip or something works 1,000 times better than it ever did before, despite the fact that there's no literature supporting that, you would be impressed by that. And so is the rest of mankind. It's one of the greatest problems that the FDA has now, is this stem cell tourism. So it's very unlikely that they're going to relax all, the regulations around stem cells, because there are a lot of people being harmed by going on these stem cell tourism things. So this is not simple. On the one hand, stem cell generation of organs could solve a lot of the medical problems in all fields that we know of today. On the other hand, stem cell tourism right now is the biggest regulatory problem that exists out there, with a lot of these unproven bogus stem cell therapies. Okay, there are many problems with stem cell generated organs that are not being discussed. And I don't think you should exclude yourself from the action in this area. The people who need to be discussing it are you. It's not like, oh, well, those guys need to be. No, you need to be talking about this. What does this mean for the particular field, the particular area that you're into? Okay, so this is a ghost heart. It's a decellularized heart. And I think many people in transplantation believe that although all the technical details are not worked out yet, that eventually this will be perfect. There will be no side effects, there'll be no immunosuppression needed, that all the cells will be the right kinds of cells in the right places, and this heart will function just as well as it did before, just as well as a normal heart. Be so perfect, so magic, that all the details of transplantation medicine that you're learning now will be irrelevant. That is extremely far from the truth. So what happened was that at the meeting in May, that was kind of how it seemed. All the discussion was, what about these regulatory barriers, or why can't we get more people to do this, and so on. And there was no discussion of anything that was like a technical problem with decellularizing and recellularizing organs. So the meeting, the end of July, the poorly attended regenerative medicine sessions, you guys weren't there. I'm sure you were somewhere else that made more sense for you to be, because it's not your area. One learned that these organs clot like crazy. You cannot re-endothelialize the vasculature more than about 80 or 85%. And the part that lacks the endothelium clots like crazy. You can sort of cover the whole thing with an artificial anticoagulant surface. But then all the capillaries that are ordinarily fenestrate can't allow the cells out, and so it's a completely artificial circumstance. And the idea of the cells all ending up in the same place, The easiest thing when you're just trying to show a magic trick is to take this pink organ, make it white, and make it pink again. That's easy. But to make the pink again organ be where the cells are actually the right cells in the right places are particularly hard, especially for the kidney. The kidney is substantially behind the liver, but even for the liver, there was a very high-profile article in 2010, most of you know, about doing this for the liver, and those livers worked for only 3 days. And it was, I forget, a mouse model. Well, that's not what you're looking to do for patients. 3 days is not going to cut it. So what are some of the problems? So the recellularized organs, they clot like crazy. It's impossible to regenerate more than 80% at the moment of the endothelial surface, so you get all this bare collagen. You can create a sort of artificial heparinized surface, but then the cell trafficking doesn't work right. It's very hard to get the right types of cells in the right places and to get normal structure at a microscopic level. It's easy to get something that's pink and has blood flow going through it. The other thing, a little bit interesting, what do you mean by function? When you say, well, we regenerated this organ with stem cells and it functioned right away. Well, in the kidney, what that can mean is that urine came out right away. And one reason for that is it's very, very easy to generate kidneys that lack the loop of Henle. Well, you can't concentrate the urine without the loop of Henle, so you can pour out your entire body water in an hour and be dead, right? So having such a kidney would be worse than not having one, right? So when you say, well, look at all the urine coming out of this regenerated kidney, wow, this is really functioning. That's not really functioning. And I think, in fact, that is when people have been trying to show how well this works. If you can get drops of urine coming out of a recellularized kidney, people are really impressed by that. But if it can't, concentrate the urine, it would create a lethal polyuria, and that's bad, right? The kidney progenitor stem cell has been difficult to identify, and for that reason, the kidney work has tended to lag behind other organs, but I think it's, let's see, this is, so one thing that this means for me is that this feeling of nostalgia for the past, which you may probably all think is an undesirable characteristic that you may have, like things that you learned about, say, renal physiology, heart, physiology, islet cell physiology, whatever the things you learned in the beginning that you may think are not very valuable now, all those same questions are being asked again about the stem cell generated organ. For instance, have you heard of the intact nephron hypothesis, right? Bricker's, that's from the 1960s. The idea of when you have damage in the tubular system, what does the function of the overall kidney, how does it reflect, the damage in, so the idea that the final urine, the function of the kidney mostly reflects the tubular systems that are completely intact. That's a kind of old-fashioned thing. We don't think about that much anymore. But think now about stem cell generation of a kidney lacking loops of Henle. It makes a big difference whether the nephrons that lack the loop of Henle still have tubular fluid flow, so the whole entire body water of the patient is just pouring out in the ureter, or whether if they lack the loop of Henle, they don't function at all. And that's that same question. And so there are many other things like that. Whatever your favorite organ is, you remember, like in the heart, you had the stunned myocardium, right? That was big a long time. Those same questions, those same basic physiology, how does the organ work questions that are now worked out a long time ago for the native organ. We still have to ask those questions for the stem cell generated organ. So none of your past knowledge that you thought, well, that's worthless now, nobody's going to ask me. Actually, it's valuable now to ask those same questions, and nobody's doing that. You've got two groups of people. One who are scared to death that this is going to put them out of business, so they don't want to think about it, and another group that can't reveal any of the problems for fear that their funding will be cut or something. And you've got nobody providing the conversational bridge between those two areas. And that's what I'm telling you needs to happen. And you guys can be the start of that. So, what does it mean for the transplant pathologist? Well, the transplant pathologist will also become tissue engineering pathologists. And thinking about technologically induced job loss. I think what I've already told you about this area, if you think of all the people in the future who are going to lose their jobs because robots can do it better, in the area of stem cell generated organs, this is so complicated that we're going to need human beings in this area for a very long time. It'll be like the most secure physician job you could possibly have, because robots aren't going to be able to figure this out anytime soon. Maybe they'll be able to figure out what you're doing now, but not this. So I think that rather than thinking that stem cells are going to put you out of a job, stem cells are going to be the job, man. That's what's going to keep you employed long after other, human beings have been stuck up at the top of Maslow's pyramid, where self-actualization and writing poetry all day, that's all they can do, right? But you'll still have a job, because this is complicated. So, these old-fashioned questions, the intact nephron hypothesis, cell regeneration. So the easiest way in the kidney to take a decellularized kidney and make it pink again, and this works really well, but is of no value, is to infuse proximal tubular cells, mature proximal tubular cells. You sort of fill up all the kidney and they grow and thrive, but they can't do anything useful without the other functioning parts. Turns out that the podocyte, the epithelial cell of the glomerulus, cannot be easily cultured. It seems to turn into some other type of cell when you try to make more of them. It seems to be a terminally differentiated cell, much like the neuron or something like that. So this is not simple, and we need to get people to use their skepticism about new things, their reluctance to accept change. Bring this to the fore. Ask questions. Get people to tell you, what is my future going to be like? I'm a young person training in transplantation. You haven't clearly explained to me what's going to go on with this stem cell stuff. Do we have a role? Do we just give up? Do we need to go into orthopedics, or is there something we can really do? I think there's something. There's a natural sort of flow between what you're doing now and the questions that need to be answered here. Still, there is, I think, reluctance. People don't like to get outside of their comfort zone. One analogy I've used is the one of turtles all the way down. And you would know that many famous authors have used this. But the idea is, if you think that you only need to sort of keep abreast of the changes going on in your particular field, that you're badly misguided, because that field, like, you know, transplantation depends upon all of medicine, which depends upon all of science, and all that, and all these things are changing and shifting. So you need to kind of accept and take a proactive role. Okay, let me tell you about David Crippen, because what I've been claiming is the turtles all the way down people get bored with about 90 seconds into talking about where David Crippen's a little bit more interesting. So as I said, he and I were sort of comparable. He was in critical care medicine, I was in kidney medicine and kidney pathology when the web began. But everything about the 60s and the 70s that you might find particularly interesting, the music, the culture, the drugs, the sex, and everything, David was doing it and I wasn't. I mean, he knew all the groupies. He was Timothy Leary's personal physician for the last 7 years of his life. He's really, and if you think about, you know, a renal pathologist sits in his office, you know, in a microscope, and the door opens every now and then, new slides come in. David Crippen is up and walking around all the time. So most of my work life I've been sitting down, he's been standing up. He has many vintage motorcycles. He's been the physician for motorcycle teams, and he's has his own rock band. You know, many physicians are in bands, and band plays at some sort of medical meeting, and it's not very good, but everybody's sort of polite about it. This band's actually good, and it performs at many non-medical situations. During the Vietnam War, he got really bad grades in school. He was kicked out of one place and flunked out of a second place, and so his girlfriend looked him in the eye, told him he was a loser. She never wanted to see him again, so he got drafted and went to Vietnam. And he won many medals for bravery. Let's see, we probably have that. Yeah, so many military awards. He has a karate black belt. He has no civilian awards. So I have a bunch of civilian awards. I never served in the military. I don't do karate at all. In his email discussion group, they talk about everything. We have always excluded humor, politics, because potentially they can be offensive and they bring people off topic. He particularly on the weekends allows conversation on all subjects. And I must say that his email discussion groups are much more colorful and interesting than mine are. But, we never talk about anything other than kidney medicine. He talks about critical care medicine, a bunch of other things. So, his rock band, motorcycles, colorful history. I have no band, no motorcycle. I was quite a boring young person. I got good grades, but otherwise I was as dull as you could possibly imagine. So I told this story at the last BAF meeting in Brazil, and a very interesting thing happened, which I took as evidence of great success of this metaphor. That was that people began to believe, the more I talked about David Crippen, that David Crippen did not exist. There could not be any person like this. He did not exist. And I think that's just really cool, because when you convert a metaphor into a myth, then you really accomplish something with an audience. So I don't know if you think I've accomplished anything with you as an audience, but this is the last slide. In our original location at the BAF meeting in One, we had mule deer poking their heads into the meeting rooms, and things have become a little bit more organized since then. So we've come a long way, but I don't want to dissuade you from thinking that this thing about stem cells and, you know, generating organs and that competing with your current work life, the idea that you may have had in the past, that has nothing to do with you personally. It's something that may happen to you, but you can't do anything about it. I would say the situation is exactly the opposite of that. It is actually the young people in the field who should be rising up, asking all these questions, making all this stuff happen. So, anyway, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Any questions? Yeah.
So I have one, direct stem cell related one. I guess working, so I'm a nephrologist, I'll declare myself as a nephrologist, but working on the ILA program, and
right.
having just done a PhD in type 1 diabetes.
Right.
I mean, I do find the ILA program a little bit like science fiction in the way you describe, in that Edmonton were rock stars 10 years ago in the diabetes world for the ILA transplant program, and now they're just about to use stem cells to try and cure type 1 diabetes in the next 6 months.
Yeah.
And islet transplantation is different, but it's possibly going to be one of the first applications. And it's really exciting that Edmonton are probably, going to be one of the very tiny number of places that do the first in-man trials of stem cells to cure type 1 diabetes.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting going to the meeting. So in diabetes medicine, the stem cell kind of therapies are pretty much already just about to arrive, aren't they? Yes. And it's interesting because what happens is people are in tribes,
right? And
you have a tribe of transplanters, a tribe of technologists, and then a tribe of immunotherapists. And interesting, the centres are commonly don't talk to each other. Mm-hmm. And as well, one of the really interesting things is half the time they're doing things which other tribes of physicians totally, like nephrologists or whoever, they've already addressed the same problems in a different way.
Yes.
So it's really interesting to see here in Edmonton that they're cracking on with stem cells to try and cure type 1 diabetes. Well, I don't know how close that will be to other organs where you need to develop...
well, if it's a tube only, then it's already working. Like stem cell generation of bladders, tracheas, I mean that's been done a long time ago. It's really easy.
Yeah.
Vaginas were the big thing, I guess, in the last year. I don't know how well that works actually, but things that are mainly tubular are easy to create. Things that have a complex structure are more of a challenge. And I'm not saying that the kidney is more interesting than the liver or more important, but it's a little bit more complicated, I guess, in terms of getting all the cells in the right place to do the right thing. But I think everybody has a role in planning the future. If you think about pediatric nephrologists, pediatric cardiologists, people dealing with genetic diseases in kids, I imagine that stem cell generated organs are going to have a lot of similar problems because you'll have things almost quite right, but maybe some important transport defect or something, quite comparable to what these... So everybody has a role. People dealing with the elderly, with kids, whatever your special area of interest of every single one of you sitting in this room, you all have something unique that you could bring to this important conversation that needs to happen. California is sort of a magical place. One of the things that they did is to create this large amount of state funding for stem cell research. It's not as well regulated as, say, national funding from, a national body in the U.S. or Canada, and that's one of the reasons that I think some of the presentations are so strange, that people are trying to make sure that this wonderful flow of money from the state of California continues. So there has to be progress. I mean, not defined maybe the way we would, but the way politicians or people deciding about funding, they have to see quote unquote exciting breakthroughs, so that the voters will vote to spend the money is what you get. But there needs to be ordinary, normal people like you in the mix who are not completely preoccupied with whether the state of California is going to fund this again. You come without bias. You can help a lot. I think you would like to have a good career inside a field that is generally doing good things in the world, and by being proactive here, you can make sure that happens. It's not just you being a victim of the future. You can actually help craft it, help form it, help shape it, and I think that's part of what I'd like to get you to think about. So those of you who've been quiet, any questions from the others of you? Yes?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, rather than try to work out a way of doing like a whole organ stem cell, like whole heart, where they can go piecemeal, like for example, if you have myocardial, after heart attack, you try myocardial cell transplant infusions, for example, see how that works and gradually work on how to work around the endothelial problem where there's a lot of thrombogenicity, the same thing with the kidney. After 8 years, and try some tubular cell infusion and gradually see how...
Yeah, I think all those things are being done. This is not just a linear single story. It's a lot of stories occurring at the same time. People are doing tolerance studies in allografts by infusing stem cells as a part of that mix. Everything that you can imagine is also being looked at. So it's not just that it's like one predominant study that's being done. There are many being done, but there are some very alarming things happening. So the NIH created a new regenerative medicine program, and they appointed a chief for this program and all this sort of thing. And people were very excited that wow, they really get it. The NIH gets it, right? So then they did their first offering of clinical trials, and they found serious flaws in every single application except one. There was one clinical trial proposed for the eye that was accepted, but they rejected 150 clinical trials and accepted one. And then they decided, well, that's the way the world is. We don't need a separate arm of the NIH for something that can only generate one acceptable clinical trial. So the guy lost his job, and they wound down this regenerative medicine arm of the NIH. What does that mean for you? Does it mean that, I don't know, political events like that don't have any particular easily ascertained meaning. It's just a little bit alarming that just when you think you've figured out exactly how the world works, something like that, happens, and it makes you think that it's a little bit more complicated than you thought previously.
I guess one of the things is when you go to some of these talks, certainly in diabetes medicine, there are probably two front-runner private companies.
Mm-hmm.
And it's for medical research, they have they've got an agenda that they need to generate the interest in the funding.
Yeah.
So the press releases kind of follow a party line that kind of dangles this carrot in front of people that we're just on the horizon to something that's going to change the world.
Right.
And that's been the way for quite some time in stem cell medicine. And it feels like to some extent, it's put off by a few years each time.
Right.
So that you wonder that the kind of scientific community they've been kept on tenterhooks for quite a while, with to kind of keep them interested and to generate research funding.
Right.
But because technically it's so challenging, you've got this kind of, it always keeps disappearing from the horizon almost, and keeps just being out of tangible reach.
Right.
So I don't know if that I get that impression that sometimes there's that kind of atmosphere at certain meetings where you because it's been around, the concept of using stem cells to grow replacement organs has been around for quite a long time.
Yes.
And you go to big funding bodies and they're like, well, this could be the cure in 5 years. But then 5 years down the line, it could be the cure in 5 years, or maybe 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
And do you think that may have contributed to the current climate?
Yeah, I think the climate is as complicated as you can possibly imagine. I mean, I meet very smart people who have been to Mexico or China or Venezuela or somewhere and gotten one of these completely unregulated stem cell therapies, but they believed that it was life-changing, so it's a complicated matter, and you can argue both ways, right? We're moving too quickly, Whoa, we got to look into this more, or that the regulatory barriers here are going to hold us back for 10 years, and we could be replacing livers, kidneys, and so on. All those things could happen, 8 years from now, except that the regulatory barriers will mean it'll be, 18 years rather than 8. And you could also mount an argument for that. Is that because, the FDA is evil and stupid? No, it's there are lots of reasons to be cautious here. You're creating, in a lot of these settings, you're potentially setting up the patient for, neoplastic growth. There are all sorts of things you have to think about. It's not simple. But I think getting the conversation started is extremely important.